Good morning, everybody. This is the Personal Playlist Podcast, fondly referred to as the P3 on Voice Ed Radio. I'm Noah Daniel.
Music is a world within itself, with a language we all understand.
I am so excited to have Leanne Hanson here on the Personal Playlist Podcast. Leanne had initially started a teaching degree straight out of high school and found she was not at all cut out to be a teacher by 90 standards and left before the first semester was out. Instead of university, she went to secretarial college and landed a variety of jobs from telephonist, which explains her fear of speaking on the phone, to limo dispatch, to admin, to an ophthalmic practice. She had 2 anthologies published, and yet she returned to university to study a graduate degree, qualified as a high school English and media teacher, and that was the beginning of her real awakening, where she was introduced to a mixed cohort of disengaged youth, long-term unemployment adults in an alternative vocational education setting. The silos of English and media were quickly broken and blended with science, math, technology, social studies, business, and employability studies in a program that she redesigned to be more inclusive and responsive to individual student needs rather than the existing workbook-based standards that had previously resulted in bored, badly behaved, and demotivated students with a high staff turnover. Leanne is a passionate defender of the interconnectedness of all things and a great advocate of the wonderful P3. From the beginning, she was a future thinker and cultural theorist who works as an educational community leader for an innovative Australian company, Become Education, transforming the way that young people are prepared for life after school in this rapidly changing world. Leanne is a launch team member for FutureWe and co-presenter of the Edunauts on Voice Ed Canada, a podcast which unpacks the FutureWe Framework of literacies that young people need in order to thrive in the future. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Noah. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here. We've actually had this on the calendar for such a long time, and I was so lucky to be a guest on your show in the middle of all of this to just further enhance and develop our relationship.
I know, I feel like we've done this before. We're like old hands at it. It's great.
It's amazing because when I listen to you, I hear your voice on Twitter. You just have such an amazing and unique style about you, and I'm really excited that you're here. I know that you have listened to the show since the beginning. What was it that caught your eye about the show, or really your ear?
Look, music is just one of those things. I always kind of wanted to be a musician, but I had absolutely zero talent for it, which was really disappointing. But I really love listening to a whole variety of music. And I like the way that this podcast in particular makes those connections between music and the emotions of the people that are actually listening to them, and the sense of place and the sense of position. So yeah, it's great, and I like the guests that you have because you always have such interesting people. So let's see how this one goes.
Well, I think you're a pretty interesting person. You had such a various background, and you came in the most organic ways to the work that you're doing. And in 2015, you were actually the Australian finalist in the National Training Awards Language Literacy and Numeracy category. You're even a national ambassador for vocational education. I mean, you are doing a lot of wonderful things in education.
Well, I think it's only fair. I mean, I did pretty well out of education myself. I didn't come from a particularly wealthy or privileged background. In fact, pretty much the opposite. And without education, I would have ended up in a much worse place than I am now. So I think it's only fair that if you can do something, you should give something back.
That's really wonderful. And it's so nice that you talked about your beginnings, because that's a really great transition to this show and where we begin. So people bring a nostalgic, an identity, and a pick-me-up, motivational, inspirational song as their personal playlist. And the idea of this podcast is to take each of these songs and weave them together to tell your story. So you started in a geography-related song, and I was wondering if that marked your place as your beginnings. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your nostalgic song?
Okay, so I grew up in what we call the outback in Australia, I guess. It's, in the country. I grew up on dairy farms. My dad was a farmhand, so we traveled around a lot when I was a kid. We didn't live in the city at all. We lived in country New South Wales, and we had, a very interesting kind of upbringing with a lot of travel. And we were probably about 20 hours drive away from where I live now, which is in Queensland. So growing up in New South Wales, there's this big rivalry between New South Wales and Queensland. And we always thought of Queensland people as kind of hicks and really backwards. One of the big musicians that we used to play, because when you're in those days, we used to travel around in the car and you had the cassette deck and we had to always have music playing. And one of the big musicians in Australia is a guy called Slim Dusty, who passed away about, 10 or 15 years ago, but he was pretty much making music for something like 60 years. So he was, rather awesome. The song that I've chosen is a song that actually was my very first introduction to Queensland, and it was what formed my opinion of Queenslanders for many years. And I've since changed my opinion a little bit, but I still think of them as a little bit kind of country, and it's quite sweet.
Okay, well, it's actually a song that was made into children's songs, so let's listen to the sweetness of Grasshopper Loose in Queensland by Slim Dusty.
Oh, grasshopper loose in Queensland, grasshopper loose in Queensland, grasshopper loose as big as any goose, and he spits tobacco juice all over Queensland. If you want a little drink in Queensland, if you want a little drink in Queensland, if you want a little drink, well, you give the maid a wink, and it's quicker than you think in Queensland. Oh, play it pretty now. Oh, they grow the sugar cane in Queensland. They grow the sugar cane in Queensland. They grow the sugar cane, then they load it on a train till it's syrup in a tin in Queensland. Old men chew tobacco in Queensland. Old men chew tobacco in Queensland. They look at you and grin when it dribbles down the chin in Queensland. I played bluegrass now. Ah, yeah, that's the sound.
It's funny how songs like that, when you're little and you listen to that and it just seems so sweet, and as you get older, you realize it's actually feeding your perspective.
Oh yeah, it's terribly prejudiced really when you think about it. But the wonderful thing about Slim Dusty is that was actually that was pretty much my introduction to poetry as well, which might sound a bit weird, but he was a very big proponent of what we call the bush ballads in Australia. So he actually set to music quite a lot of the poetry of our sort of national heroes, which was Banjo Paterson and Henry Lawson, two major bush poets from the turn of the last century. Banjo Paterson's the guy who wrote Waltzing Matilda and The Man from Snowy River and things like that. So my dad and I used to, when we were doing the dishes, we used to sit the poetry books up in front of us and we'd read like a stanza each. And that was how I learned all my poems when I was a kid. So that's the only time I actually developed any rhythm was reading poetry. It just didn't translate to music.
But you didn't just develop rhythm. You've had 2 anthologies published. You took a position as editor-in-chief for an international poetry journal. Poetry is so embedded into so much of your identity. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that connects to the song choice that you have?
Okay, well, poetry is, it's a really big deal to me. I always loved writing. I always loved rhyming poetry. I never really understood it, understood how the rhythms work together until I went to, in fact, after university, because when I went to university to do my creative writing degree, I did a poetry course as part of that. But I, at that time, only wrote rhyming poetry and basically, in quatrains and just sort of standard format. And I was told that I couldn't write like that was just too archaic. I actually got accused of plagiarism. They said, no, nobody writes like this anymore, and we don't believe that you could have done this. So They withheld my grade for it took me a long time to actually prove, no, that's actually mine. I did write that, just because you can't write an iambic pentameter
Wow.
doesn't mean I can't. So, yeah.
How did you prove it?
Oh, well, he like the lecturer sort of sat me down and said, right, take me through your whole planning process and everything. So I'm like, this is where the idea came from. I like, you can look this up anywhere. It is not anywhere. You will not find it. So eventually they couldn't prove that I had plagiarized anything, obviously, because I hadn't. So yeah, they didn't have much choice because I was pretty cranky and pretty indignant about the whole thing. And eventually,
I would be cranky too.
Yeah, eventually I just said, look, just, obviously if you think it's good enough that it's plagiarized, just give me a decent mark. So, they didn't have a lot of choice. So I ended up, graduating with the highest grade point average in my arts degree and all of that kind of nerdy stuff. So, but yeah, poetry was something that I came back to after my kids were born and after I discovered the internet. And the internet was terrific because it had these wonderful poetry workshops on there where you could actually post something and you could get feedback. And sometimes the critique was pretty ordinary and sometimes it was a bit sort of that empty praise and things. But it taught me a whole lot about how to give and receive decent feedback and to be really critical and not nasty about telling somebody that they've done something wrong. So that poetry actually taught me quite a lot about teaching in that regard. What it did do for me, though, was it introduced me to my partner because he was also on a poetry site. And this, it always sounds a bit seedy when I say, no, I met my partner on the internet. But we did actually meet on a poetry site. And I was in the middle of a very difficult ending to a marriage. And we just kind of hit it off and eventually, and we just started out as friends and then sort of things developed and I imported him to Australia, which was really nice.
From where?
From Scotland. So I ended up with a mail order bride, which was really lovely. So, having another person who wrote poetry in the house was actually really empowering for me because he gave me really good feedback on what I wrote. So I got my first book published in 2006. And then another one after I said I'd never publish again because I made no money out of the first one. I did do another one in 2014 or 2015. I can't remember which. But the main thing that poetry gave me was this sense of this is a way to express myself and to share what I know with the world and to make comment on things that are happening without being preachy or being soapboxy. So, and it was also a way to tell people things that they could then interpret for themselves. And that's really important to me about poetry, is this idea that you should be able to read into it whatever you want. And once I write something, as far as I'm concerned, then that's it. It's for the reader to read. So,
right.
I'm not precious about ownership of my poems, which is why they're mostly for free on the internet now, because nobody ever makes money out of publishing poetry. Well,
not nobody. And it's funny that you should say that because the song that you chose for your identity song actually, alludes to two really famous poets and one of the greatest writers. And it's funny that you were talking about the plagiarism issue because one of the lines in the lyric is, if you must write prose or poems, the words you use should be your own. So I think that's really interesting. So tell us about this song. And I mean, I think I'm seeing the picture of why it reflects your identity. Maybe not the picture of Dorian Gray, but...
So it's Oscar Wilde's birthday tomorrow, and he's one of my all-time heroes. I absolutely love pretty much everything about him, although I suspect he wouldn't have been too good a company at certain times, but he was, deliciously sarcastic, and he wrote the most beautiful poetry. He's not He's best known for things like the portrait of Dorian Gray, a picture of whatever it is, and the importance of being earnest and those kind of things. But he also wrote the most beautifully aesthetic poetry, and he had a lot of classical references and things that I really love because I grew up on Greek mythology and that kind of thing, and I absolutely adored it. Um, and I love Byron and I like all the nasty people. So um, and yeah, I I don't know. I like the slightly darker, slightly edgier poetry that really builds that picture of a world that is actually beautiful despite all of the probably because all of the all of the cracks and the shadows. So that's why I chose this song, which is by the Smiths, who is they're one of my absolute all-time favorite bands, even though I'm definitely not an emo, I promise you that. So
well, the song, it's funny because when you wrote to me about it, you said, the spelling itself is frustrating because the actual spelling of the song is improper, but it came, I guess, with purpose, according to Morrissey. But here is Cemetery Gates by the Smiths.
Dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side. I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side. Wild, wild is on mine. So we go inside and we gravely read the stones. All those people, all those lives, where are they now? With the loves and hates and passions just like mine. They were born and then they lived and then they died. Seems so unfair, I want to cry. You say a thrice the sun-done salutation to the dawn, and you claim these words as your own. But I've read well and I've heard them said 100 times, maybe less, maybe more. If you must write pros and poems, the words you use should be your own. Don't plagiarize or take on loan. But there's always someone somewhere with a big nose who knows and trips you up and laughs when you fall. He'll trip you up and laugh when you fall. You say long done do dusted, words which could only be your own, and then produce the text from whence was ripped some dizzy whore 1804. I dreaded sunny days, so let's go where we're happy and then meet you at the cemetery gates. Oh, Keats and Yeats are on your side. I dreaded sunny days, so let's go where we're wanted and I meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side, but you lose, 'cause where the lover wide is on the mind.
There's so much in that, Morrissey was so dark sometimes, and yet there was like a light of the beautiful rabble-rousers of poetic history and alluding to all those people that really get you thinking and think for you and also give you perspective and also, shed light where there's darkness. And I think it's so funny, the juxtaposition in that lyric.
sorry, I totally missed all of that.
Oh, that's okay. We can come back to something else. I was just thinking about Morrissey's darkness, and you get this idea, of hanging out at the cemetery and looking at, the tombstones of dead poets. And yet words are alive. And that's one of the greatest things about poetry is it's, savored on the parchment for others. And just like you were saying, once you write a poem, that the audience really completes the poem, and it's theirs to interpret, and it's theirs to add whatever colors they want to what those words mean to them. And it really is an amazing art form.
It is, and that, you know what, that's the same way that I think about a lesson as well, because when we might author that lesson, right? We might create it and start things off, but it's up to the students to take it where they want to take it. And that's sort of the way that I think about everything is like you can only control it for so long, and then you've just got to set it free. And it's in that freedom that what other people do with what you start that makes it exciting, because you can't predict it. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's really fun when, somebody takes it in a direction that you weren't expecting.
Well, that's the best part about being student-centered and having student voice is prominent in any person's classroom, because it's exactly that. Like, you create something, you create the framework of something, and then everybody builds into it what it becomes. And it really is so powerful. And you can do the same thing, invite in the same way, and yet what everybody in the room brings to that scenario can be totally distinctive. It's an incredibly powerful experience, and it is art in many ways, way more than it is science. But sometimes the reality of it and the chemistry of it can go awry. So you need a song to lift you up and pick you up and inspire you. Tell us a little bit about your song, that third song choice for you.
Okay, well, my third song, the clue is really in the title. It is called My Happiness, and it absolutely is. It's a song by a band called Powderfinger, who are pretty seminal in Australia. They certainly in this millennium. So they're a band. This is a song that when you go into a room and it starts playing, everybody sings along. You cannot help it, and it's such an amazing energy. And I don't know whether you have to be Australian and have to have been there to enjoy it or what, but I don't know. It's just one of those songs that I love. It's about reuniting and finding the people that actually make you happy, and it's something that I don't actually have like a lot of people that I hang around with all the time, but there are a few people in my life that no matter how many years go past, as soon as they walk through the door, I feel, instantly uplifted. And I think that's the feeling for me that the song captures. So yeah, I just love it.
Okay, well, I think we should all listen to it and understand what you're speaking about, but also that whole idea of like, you don't know what you have till you're gone. And sometimes when people are not with you, that's when you know the real impact that they've had on your life. Here is My Happiness by Powderfinger.
I see your shadow on the street now. I hear you push through the rusty gate. Pick up your heels on the concrete, waiting for an oncoming way too late. It seems an age since I've seen ya. Countdown as the weeks trickle into days. So you come in and put your bags down. I know there's something in the air. How can I do this to you right now? You're over there when I need you here. My happiness slowly creeping back. Now you're at home. If it ever starts sinking in, it must be when you pack up and go. It seems an age since I've seen ya. Countdown as the weeks trickle into days. I hope that time hasn't changed ya. All I really want is for you to stay. So you come in and put your bags down. I know there's something in the air. How can I do this to
Something about the song made me think it's a soundtrack for a movie. I don't know, like there's so much, I can see it vividly in my mind.
Yeah, it's actually a really good film clip to watch as well. So it's
There is a film
yeah.
clip? Oh, you mean
Oh
you
no,
mean on the video?
sorry. What do you call those things? The music videos. So
I was like, dude, I totally knew it was a movie, but no. Okay.
It does sound really cinematic, though, doesn't it?
Yes, I think it does. Thank you for playing along with me. I appreciate it. And I so appreciate that you came out on the show. I hope it's been everything that you wanted it to be.
It's been really, really good fun. Thank you so much. I'm hoping that, my internet hasn't died. And it's been really great. Thank you so much.
FutureWe and all the work that you're doing and seeing you on Twitter, how can people find you? How can people get in touch with your writing and take your classes? Tell us a little bit more about that part.
Okay, so I'm actually not in the classroom at the moment. I'm writing a program of lesson plans that you can get yourself for your own school. So I'm work for a company called Become Education, which is really awesome, and it's designing career education for students from year 4 up to year 9. So really good stuff. I'm easy to find at Leanne Hanson on Twitter, and pretty much everywhere I'm leannehanson.com.au. So if you just search for me, you can Google me. I promise not to laugh. I am ticklish though, so Google me gently. But otherwise, I'm really easy to find.
That's wonderful. And your humor is also easy to find. Not everybody translates on Twitter, but the second I spoke to you for the first time, I think it was on Edunauts. I don't think that I actually interacted with you, although I've listened to you on VoiceEd several times. I think that was the first time that you and I had actually spoken, but I feel like I've known you for so long. You're joyful and you're insightful and you have a funny wit about you. And I'm just so glad that, you're part of the VoiceEd family. And I'm so glad that you made time to be here on the Personal Playlist podcast. Is there anything you would like to add before I play you out?
Look, honestly, just that I'm so impressed with the whole thing that VoiceEd does and that you do. And I'm so glad that we can actually connect through music and connect to people all around the world. And it just reminds us that we're all people, we're all very closely related, and no matter what, there's always going to be that really great connection. I think whether you're a teacher or, a street sweeper, it really doesn't matter. We're all just people doing amazing things and with a great soundtrack to boot.
Well, connection is always key. Thank you again so much. I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you very much. Have a great day yourself.
Thank you for joining us on the P3, the Personal Playlist podcast. I'm Noah Daniel. This is VoiceEd Radio, and I hope you have a fantastic day.